This is a talk based on my forthcoming book, coming probably this spring. And it probably looks a little bit like this, the book. And this means that this is the first time I'm actually talking about this in public, about the lesson of golden ages, their rise and their fall. So this is your one chance to break my confidence and ruin the entire project completely. So pay attention, because this is the one chance that you will get. It might look like this. It might be called Peak Human. We don't know. One of the editors said that it sounds a little bit like it's a book about exercise. But then another staffer said that, well, it will probably sell better if they think it's an exercise book. So we might stick with it after all. But in a way, it is about how we get and stay in shape, how human civilizations stay in shape. And why should we care about that? Well, because they don't always do. Some of you might be familiar with this sense that I got when I was in Athens for the first time in my life, and I made this pilgrimage to the Democratic Assembly, to Plato's Academy, and here to Aristotle's Lyceum. Places of the some of the most extraordinary episodes in human history. And it all just made me incredibly sad. Because this used to be places bustling with creativity and excitement. And now it was all silent. And it was all just filled with actually some trash and dog waste. And silence, except the odd intoxicated passerby who asked me for a cigarette. And this has stuck with me since then. Why is it that some places experience such extraordinary efflorescences, and then suddenly they go all quiet? It all suddenly becomes all sluggish and stationary. This, and for sure, there are places of extraordinary beauty in Athens as well. When you go to the Acropolis and you watch the Parthenon, it's amazing, but it's still an outdoor museum. This used to be the place where the world revolved around, but now it's a museum and some cobbled together stones patched up and plaques telling us that this used to be glorious. This must have been what Shelley thought about when he wrote Ozymandias, this poem about the wrecked, ruined column of Ozymandias, king of kings out there in the desert. And Ozymandias says on his plaque, "Look on my works, you mighty, and despair. But nothing beside remains, the lone and level sands stretch far away." That must get you thinking about what makes it possible and what makes it impossible. Will it be, in fact, that future generations will go to our meeting places, our great monuments, perhaps here to Berkeley, and look at what once was, but now it's just a shadow of its old self? The sad thing about golden ages is that they become known as golden ages afterwards, for the next generations who think about all the amazing things that once happened here, and now they have no idea of how to rebuild it, what kind of materials they used, and what thoughts ran through their heads. But at their peak, they were extraordinary. This is a chart that's familiar to everybody in the progress community. Hockey sticks of various versions. This is GDP per capita. Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, and then suddenly everything happens all at once. And this is an incredibly important chart, but it doesn't tell the whole story, because it's not that everything exciting happened in the past few decades. During that period, which seems so average, there were extraordinary episodes of efflorescences, cultures that rose and fall. And this is why I wrote this book. To really understand what makes progress possible and what might undermine it, we have to look at those episodes as well. As the great economic historian Joel Moker, who's a source of inspiration for this book, puts it, a society that has ceased to concern itself with the progress of the past will soon lose belief in its capacity to progress in the future. So, what is progress in the past? What is a golden age? Well, it's a period with a large number of innovations that revolutionize many fields and sectors and aspects of human life simultaneously in a very short period of time. It is associated with a culture of optimism, of hope, which encourages people to explore new knowledge, to experiment with new methods and technologies, and exchange the result with others. Its characteristics are cultural creativity, scientific discoveries, technological achievements, and economic growth that stand out compared to what came before and what came afterwards and what happened in other cultures simultaneously. Its result is, and this is what people historically paid most attention to, is a very high average living standards compared to the peer groups, usually the envy of others, often also of their heirs. And if you wonder where I stand in the culture wars, this project is in opposition to both the progressive left and to the nationalist right. A progressive left that thinks that all cultures and civilizations are equal and nothing is better than anything else, which would mean that we don't have it in us within our own culture to improve and make progress and correct some of the mistakes that we have made historically, which is an awful way of raising the white flag and giving up all hope for progress. But it's also opposed to a nationalist conservative idea that history is a clash between civilization and barbarism, and that one particular culture is the hope, usually some sort of Judeo-Christian culture, and everything else is barbarity, and there's a struggle between these two groups. I would say when you look at history's golden ages, you notice something else. That cultures that used to be considered barbaric in one episode is considered the world leaders and the golden eras in the next period. And they're usually the most golden when they're most open to the influences of other cultures and to other ideas. So it's not a clash between civilization, it's a clash within every civilization, within every culture, between the civilized part of us and the barbaric part of us, because we have got both, and every culture has got both. So in this book, I look at 7 golden ages, and here is the brief summary. I begin where many begin. You could start, elsewhere in Mesopotamia or something like that, but I only got 7. That's what my editor told me, so I had to start in ancient Athens, in ancient Greece, the city-state that gave us the idea of democracy, the science of history. It gave us drama, both comedy and tragedy. It gave us philosophy, and I would argue it gave us the very idea of intellectual innovation. The first culture where people proudly said that this thing that I discovered was something that I discovered, in opposition to traditions, in opposition to my peer group and others. In previous cultures, they were innovative for sure in Mesopotamia, but they still pretended that some god made this up or some forefathers made it up. Here we get for the first time people like Aristotle, who actually says that, you know what, our friends are dear to us, our teachers, our traditions are dear to us, but the truth is even more dear to us. So they really deserve a place in the golden ages. And so does Rome, ancient Rome, the Republic and the early empire, apparently the place that men think about all the time nowadays. Because, what did the Romans ever do to us? Our legal system, our urban grid, architectural styles, the word and idea of a republic and a senate meeting in the capital, our Latin alphabet, many of the European languages, the Christian church in both its Catholic and its Orthodox forms, and the calendar. And apparently men do think about it. There was a poll recently saying that 13% of American men think about the Roman Republic or Empire every day, which seems... and astonishingly, 50% of Americans have a positive view of the Roman Empire, and only 13% a negative one, which gives the Roman Empire a net approval rating that our politicians can only dream of. Augustus would win this presidential election in a landslide, despite paganism and slavery and war and everything. So it deserves a place there as well. So does, I think, the Abbasid Caliphate, in here represented by the capital Baghdad in the 8th and 9th century, which apparently, according to legend, was an attempt to emulate the perfect circle of Euclid, which was the caliph's great source of intellectual inspiration. The Abbasids said that the remnants of the Roman Empire, East Rome, Byzantine, they are the barbarians. They don't deserve the Greek and the Roman heritage because they've established an orthodoxy and they burn the books and they chase away the dissenters. Whereas here at the crossroads of the universe, we welcome every idea and are open to the new ideas, created a large translation movement whereby they translated not just the Greek books that were going out of fashion in Europe, but also from Sanskrit, from the Persian scientists and so on, and thereby created what they thought of as a universal science. And we don't have to go further than the letter A to realize how much in debt we are to the Arab world. Arabic numerals, algebra, algorithm, arithmetic, average, and philosophers like Avicenna and Averroes, who were so influential in Europe that we even Latinized their names in this way. Then we have to go to the other side of the globe, to China under the Song dynasty. Karl Marx famously said that three novel inventions, the printing press, the magnetic compass, and gunpowder, have ushered in the bourgeois revolution and the modern European state. But of course, the Song Chinese had all of that 1,000 years ago. As Joseph Needham, the great scholar of the history of technology in China, writes, whenever one follows up any specific piece of scientific or technological history in Chinese literature, it is always at the Song dynasty that one finds the major focal point. And this goes for hydraulic engineering and bridge building and architecture, chemical science, textile machines, iron and steel production, to the extent that many scholars think that China was close to ushering in the modern world, modern science, and an industrial revolution 400 years before it was a glint in James Watt's eye. So it is fitting that it's there. But then we return to Europe, to the Italian Renaissance, the burgeoning, now growing Italian trade centers, the city-states that were inspired by Marco Polo's stories about China's exceptional wealth. Perhaps we can do something like that. Inspired by the stories of ancient Greece and Rome that they learned from the Arabs and the books that they got during Crusades and from Andalusian Spain. And the philosophy like Averroes, Aristotle, and everything came back through that way. And that restored a culture of innovation, experimentation to Europe, pioneered organized enterprises, and conspicuous consumption in the arts, and some truly exceptional artworks and architectural wonders, like here in Florence. And some words that we still use today come from the Italians, like bank, bankrupt, carat, career, cartel, cash, credit, mercantile management, and net. And they got most of it from the capitalist free trading Mediterranean, where the Italians said, when the Pope said you shouldn't trade with a Muslim, said free trade should be free even to the gates of hell. But yeah, that deserves an applause. Could be a t-shirt, I think. But it didn't last, so we have to go to Northern Europe. And only now, in the 16th and 17th century, does this become a northwestern story about golden ages, the Dutch Republic. And this is actually my favorite in history. This is the thing that I love more than anything else. The stubborn merchants and quite eccentric Calvinists in a sodden North European periphery. They don't even have land on which to grow food and stand on. They make a revolt against the greatest empire of the day, the Spanish Empire. And it's obviously hopeless. An 80-year-long brutal struggle against the mightiest empire on the planet. And it ends with a sodden periphery succeeding triumphantly and the Spanish Empire on its knees after having declared state bankruptcy 5 times during this war. And meanwhile, this band of rebels has now invented modern capitalism, stock exchanges, becoming the wealthiest population on the planet in history, and in just 2 generations built a world empire through an unprecedentedly open intellectual climate, unleashed a golden era of art, the Rembrandts, the Vermeers of the world, and all the beautiful canals and buildings of Amsterdam, and also kick-started the European Enlightenment. Not necessarily because the Dutch are so great, but because they are, for sure, but they opened their borders to dissenters and eccentrics from every place. So when Jonathan Israel, the great historian of the Enlightenment, talks about the 5 founding fathers of the Enlightenment, he talks about Spinoza, Descartes, Leibniz, Locke, and Hobbes. And in fact, all of them had a very close connection to the Dutch Republic, Pierre Bayle as well, so 6 founding fathers. They all lived in Amsterdam or other Dutch cities for a while, but few of them were Dutch. Spinoza was, but his ancestry was Portuguese Jewish. So it was the openness of the Dutch Republic that made this happen. They had the printing houses, the sciences, and philosophers that kickstarted the Enlightenment during this brutal 80-year war. And it should be a Netflix series, for sure. And then eventually we go to the Anglosphere, the British and the Americans. Only now in the 19th century it really happens there. Not because the British are great, but because they were invaded successfully by the Dutch. William of Orange, the de facto leader of the Dutch Republic, invades in 1688, crushes all the resistance and quickly rebrands this as a glorious revolution and restores the powers of parliament, institutes rule of law, and thereby transplants these Dutch ideas that they got from the Italian Renaissance and from the Abbasid Arabs and so on, in a bigger body, larger population that is rapidly urbanizing, unleashes an industrial revolution, the greatest revolution in human history, the only revolution that never ended and just kept on giving, at least for now. Then reinforced and accelerated when the British did the best thing that they ever did, and that was losing its American colonies and allowed it to flourish freely and created this great reservoir of liberty that keeps on pushing the technological and intellectual frontiers again and again. And next, we don't know what happens. That's the last chapter in my book. We'll see what the 8th, if there is an 8th golden age after this. But this, I think, this brief overview tells you that it's not a particular civilization, it's not a particular ethnic group, it's not a particular religion or a tradition. It happened in pagan societies, Muslim, Confucian, Catholic, Calvinist, Anglican, and secular societies. But it happened when those cultures did something special, being more open than they were before. Now, and I need this brief caveat, it wasn't golden for everyone. Much like an Olympic gold medal, which I think is made up of 5% gold nowadays, really debasing the coinage. All these cultures had slavery, they all had oppression, they all saw women as at least less than full citizens, sometimes the property of fathers and of husbands, and they all took great delight in many periods in exterminating neighboring populations, man, woman, and child. So it wasn't golden all the time in every way, but that doesn't set them apart from other contemporary cultures. Everybody did this. What set them apart was something else, that they started to become golden in another way. For 2 reasons, I think. Because they imitate and they innovate. That's how you create your own golden age. You imitate what others do, and then you innovate by combining what you've learned from others. So first of all, you need lots of people. You need a certain population density. You need a certain number of people here at the Progress Conference to run into exciting people, find that serendipity so that something exciting and novel happens. The greater the chances is that something great will take place. And that's why this happens in urban areas, where people constantly bump into each other. Cities, the quick forge and workshop of human thought, as Shakespeare called it, that is always a necessary thing. And that was the case definitely for sure in those ancient civilizations. We don't have exact numbers of Abbasid Baghdad or Song Kaifeng and Guangzhou, but hundreds of thousands of people lived in those cities. According to some exaggerated estimates, more than 1 million people. And remember, this was at a period of time when that great European metropolis, Paris, had probably 20,000 inhabitants. London had 10,000 inhabitants. It happened where people bumped into each other constantly. But then it takes two sorts of institutions. The first one is openness. You have to be open to those other ideas and innovations and methods that you learn from others. Merchants, migrants, and intellectual exchange. This is what creates a golden age. Many of them were at the crossroads between other civilizations and thereby learned something new constantly. They were all trading civilizations, here represented by the Greek city-states, about 1,000 city-states in ancient Greece, so 1,000 laboratories of ideas, of ways of running the government and ways of destroying your neighbors and so on, many things to learn from. But the traders, all of them, constantly picking up ideas on their business travels. Rome, 80,000 kilometers of paved road that connected this empire, and obviously that wasn't the most important thing. The Mediterranean, the oceans, the rivers was, meaning that whatever happened in one corner of the empire could fairly quickly be repeated somewhere else in this empire. And that's how they got their engineering, the greatest mix of concrete until then, new ideas on how to behave and trade. They were tolerant, the Romans. Not to everyone. They killed and exterminated populations that didn't surrender, but they preferred that they surrendered voluntarily, and then they even kept the elites in place. They kept the religion in place. They kept everything in place because they knew that they could learn more by picking up ideas. A strategic tolerance. Openness was a weapon, literally. They got their shield from the Sabines, their way of forming their legions from the Etruscans, their ships from the Phoenicians, and their Spanish shields is what it says on the tin. So they constantly picked up new ideas. As Montesquieu said, the reason why the Romans conquered the world was that they instantly dropped their own ideas and methods when they found something else somewhere else. Openness also represented by the Abbasid Caliphate, which built what they called House of Wisdom, or actually Houses of Wisdom, where they invited scholars from all over the empire and from other empires as well to bring their ideas, their discoveries, their science to the table so that they would learn from all of them. This is the way to get access to more brains and thereby being able to do more things than you did before. And this is also why all of these cultures had references to themselves as open. The Abbasids said that they were built at the crossroads of the universe. Guangzhou, the Song Chinese, said that this is the hub of the universe. Nowadays, some Americans say they're the center of the universe, but they all mean the same thing, that the whole world is coming there and all the ideas, all the methods, all the technologies are on display. And that creates an extraordinarily creative opportunity to get something done, to go from imitation to innovation by combining these ideas. And all these golden ages have some form of inclusive institutions in common as well. Because people need the freedom to start to use all these ingredients that they learn from their merchants and migrants, to combine them in novel ways, to come up with new technologies and ideas and thoughts. And that takes freedom. It takes, here represented by an open debate in Athens, the Roman goddess of Justitia, rule of law, and Sinbad the sailor in the Abbasid Caliphate. It's not always represented in modern adaptations, but he was a merchant. That's what led him out on his travels. He was out there to trade with others. These things mean an openness to new ideas and an intellectual exchange, a rule of law, which means that it's not all down to the ruler or the local bureaucrat to decide post fact that, no, we don't like this innovation and will destroy this business or burn these books. Some sort of Roman law or Islamic law, which means that you can go anywhere in the empire and the same rules and laws and property rights applies. And some economic freedom, property rights and security for businesses so that it's not stolen and taken away by others. And this creates something astonishing. When you have openness and inclusivity in this way, you create dynamist societies, to speak with Virginia Postrel, where you are open to new surprises that can come from anywhere. And therefore, I want to share 3 brief stories about this kind of innovation. Joel Moker, the economic historian again, he talks about every act of major innovation is an act of rebellion. An act of rebellion against old ideas, incumbents in the religious, intellectual, political, and economic system. And that takes a culture of optimism. It takes some institutions to have the freedom to do it, but it also takes some hope that if you take a risk, you might succeed. And looking at others doing it is one incentive of doing this. Look at Giotto's great painting of Judas's Kiss over there in the 14th century. Fairly lifelike characters compared to what came before, with depth, solidity, and motion. He started using the colors to convey distance and perspectives. And this was brand new in art when he did it, and it inspired other Renaissance painters and artists, Michelangelo and Leonardo and all the rest. But why did he do it for the first time? Everybody knew that people looked like this. They had colors that conveyed distance, right? You're all lifelike. We can see that with our own eyes. Perhaps not every one of us, but most. I'll try to cheer you up so that you wake up. But he was the first to do it, because all the traditions of Byzantine art was that you just don't do that, because that's not the point. You're trying to convey a message of a biblical story, and then Maria is always bigger than Joseph because she's more important to the story. Anyone could have painted in Giotto's way, perhaps not as great as Giotto, but anyone could have done that for 1,000 years before him. But he was the only one who made that act of rebellion, and that then inspired others. Or look at the flying shuttle, this great way of improving productivity in weaving. Anton House points out that the most extraordinary thing about this great invention that's often credited with helping the Industrial Revolution to take place is that it was so simple. A child should have been able to come up with it through trial and error. It didn't take any special knowledge, and it only took some string and 2 wooden boxes on either side to catch this shuttle. So why didn't anyone for 5,000 years come up with this innovation? Probably because it wasn't a culture of innovation where you experimented and took risks. Perhaps because societies lived on the edge of subsistence. And if you do, you don't experiment, because most experiments fail, and then you die. So you're not a popular character if you do. But if you live in a culture where you can see others innovating and changing and doing something new and creating great wonders, you're inspired to do the same. Or look at my favorite innovation story in human history, John Hanway's umbrella down here. The first guy who brought an umbrella to the streets of London in the 1750s. In London, they should have erected statues to the guy who came up with the idea of living in London without getting wet. But no, he was ridiculed by the Londoners. They attacked him. They said it looked silly, ridiculous, feminine. It even looked French, according to some. The coach drivers, they were really angry because they thought that this creative destruction would undermine their business model, because you want to stay in a closed-off carriage during rain. So they pelted him with garbage. They even tried to run him over. But for 40 years, Jonas Hanway persisted and carried the umbrellas on the streets of London until other people began to think, why doesn't he get wet like the rest of us? That perhaps we should take the risk of looking a little bit French to protect ourselves against the rain. The point is that it took 40 years for the umbrella in London, of all places. And that tells me that we're not innovative enough. We're just not experimental enough. We don't want to take risks. We don't want to expose ourselves to the ridicule of the community. Therefore, we need a culture of hope and of optimism, where acts of rebellion are celebrated and encouraged and financially rewarded, because otherwise it doesn't happen. In other words, we need golden ages. In this case, when that happens, and often in these golden ages, it happened after a successful war or a coup that made someone in power feel fairly safe and confident, and then portraying themselves in propaganda as the protectors of peace and of exploration, that we will build something new, we will develop something new and make the sea lanes safe for trade. Then people started to do it. It becomes self-generating because of proof of concept. When the Jonas Hanways do it for 40 years, someone else picks up the ideas, and we begin to enter a period of where we unleash continuously emergent novelty. And this is why a general sense of pessimism is the worst and most self-fulfilling despair that'll bring us to all the wrong places. Which brings us here at the end of my talk to the question of decline and fall. If they are so great, these cultures, why do they end, often in spectacular fashion? Well, to me, when I look at it, it seems like in history there's a great status quo filter, borrowed from the idea of the great filter as one of the solutions to the Fermi paradox of, if there are so many aliens, how come we don't see them? There's some great filter stopping that from happening. Well, in history there's a great status quo filter that sort of tries to bring this continuously emergent novelty down again. Sometimes it peters out because the epistemic base is just too shallow. We have some innovations and nothing more happens. We need something extra. We've borrowed all these things from these great civilizations and we just can't get further than that. Sometimes it's neighbors coveting the wealth of the Abbasids or the Song Chinese or the Dutch Republic. So Mongols and the French start invading and destroying the experiment. Sometimes it's the traditional horsemen of the apocalypse and the pandemics and the changes of climate that destroys the crops. But you know what? The horsemen of the apocalypse, they're always there. The barbarians are always banging on the doors. Why is it that in some periods these cultures lose the flexibility, the innovation to persist and continue to innovate their way out of every problem? Invaders can kill and destroy, but they can't kill and destroy our own curiosity and innovation. We have to do that ourselves, and this is what happens in history. As D.C. Somerville, Toynbee's editor, said once upon a time, a society does not ever die from natural causes, but always die from suicide or murder, and nearly always it's suicide. And this brings me back to Joel Moker's expression that innovation is an act of rebellion against conventional wisdom and vested interests. Because unfortunately, conventional wisdom and vested interest often regain their footing and start pushing back against innovation that undermines their power base, because it is built on certain ideas, religions, and methods of production. And they don't necessarily want to stand innovation. So they want to impose, again, centralization, stasis, orthodoxy. And they often succeed when people are afraid, when people are terrified about the world. That's the moment when they say, now everything is scary, but I have a way of bringing you back to a nice, decent, harmonious, static place called the 1950s, or in Ming Chinese days, it was the Tang dynasty. They even forced people to wear the clothes they did 500 years ago. We will protect you by bringing back something safe, predictable, to put an end to all this misery. Ideas and economics is not zero-sum, but orthodoxies are. So orthodoxies, whenever they are implemented, has a way of triggering tribal warfare and centralization. All of these cultures have had a death to Socrates moment, when they soured on their own intellectual innovation and began to persecute the innovators. The Socrates story is a little bit more complicated like that, but it's a great metaphor, so let's skip that now. The whole story is in the book. The point is, they all have a moment when they become terrified of openness and unpredictability and want a strong man, a big protector that will just keep them in place. In Rome, suddenly, in the 3rd and 4th century, when they began to suffer from some pandemics, a breaking down of some of the economic relationships, pagans for the first time started to persecute the Christians for a more sustained period of time. And then the Christians took power and persecuted the pagans instead. The Abbasids, when they started to seeing that they were challenged by new interpretations of Islam, Shia Islamic forces on their borders, they began to implement state orthodoxies, state-run madrasas that weren't houses of wisdoms, but barracks of orthodoxy, where you would just have to learn the real story. China, after the Song dynasty and Mongol invasions, the Ming take power and implement orthodoxies, ban trade, and put an end to this intellectual curiosity. The Italian Renaissance is wrecked, much like the Abbasid Baghdad story, when they experience new, novel interpretations of their religion. Protestant Reformation is going on, and they're good at prosecuting people, so we should have a counter-reformation and prosecute people and put fig leaves on all of those paintings that Michelangelo painted in the Sixtine Chapel. Some great artists, actually, they're historical, they went down in the history books as the people who put fig leaves on Michelangelo's stuff, started burning books and started burning heretics. Even the Calvinist Dutch, when they get power eventually in the late 17th century, start to purge the universities of dissenters. All the disciples of Descartes and of Spinoza, they are chased away and people start leaving those universities. Orthodoxy, centralization, and especially what often comes later, an abandonment of openness in general. Intellectual exchange, but also trade, is the start of the decline of these civilization. Then it breaks down and leaves nothing but trash and dog waste. So the good news when looking at all these different civilizations is that it can happen anywhere. With any kind of cultural tradition or any kind of people or any geography, you can have golden ages anywhere. But the bad news is it's not guaranteed anywhere. It could end even in the places where they think it's the best time. So the question then is, where does this leave us? We've had a good run. We've had 200 years in the in this era of this golden age, and in a way better than any of the others, because now for the first time, because of global markets, global transportation and communication, this has not just been a local phenomena that was ruined, but has kept on expanding throughout the world to the greatest golden era ever. But at the same time, all the devils are here as well. We have a great backlash right now against globalization, against trade and immigration, against innovation. We have increasingly stifling regulation from people who think that innovation will kind of undermine the status quo. So the great status quo filter is here as well. The question is, will it stop us, or will we continue? Well, that's a question for you to think about and for us to talk about. My only, just to try to end on a slightly happier note, we have tried to commit suicide before in under these 200 years. We've had totalitarianism. We've had the greatest industrial forms of persecution ever. We've had world wars, and yet we have persisted and continued to thrive in this civilization. And the most hopeful thing, I think, is that we are in a position now with 200 different polities around the world that are all have access to the accumulated knowledge of mankind. So once upon a time, if you ruined Baghdad, it was over. Then we were all going back to the Dark Ages. Or if you ruin Rome, it's over. Nowadays, we can fail spectacularly over here. But others will pick up the torch. They have the same knowledge base. They could keep on innovating. I don't know if that's much comfort, but it's at least more hopeful than other golden ages in this extent. But at least I think we can all agree on this conclusion: to break through this great status quo filter and keep on going, we're going to need a lot more progress conferences like this. Thank you.